What do the Chaos Space Marines of Warhammer 40K actually want? What is the point of continuing a war that has gone on for over 10,000 years? Is it something as simple as vengeance? Do they want to see the entire galaxy destroyed? Or in their own dark and twisted way, do they believe that what they are doing is truly the best path forward for humanity? In this video, we're going to be taking a look at all of the different traitor legions, boiling them down to their fundamental principles that guide them in their fight against the Imperium, and try to figure out what makes them tick, what their beliefs, goals, and overall objectives actually are. And that's a lot easier said than done, as all of the traitor legions are broken up into hundreds of different competing warbands, all with their own differing agendas. It's honestly kind of a miracle that Chaos is ever able to actually unite for one of Abaddon's Black Crusades. For the War Master, it's gotta be like trying to herd cats. If, those cats were 8-foot-tall demonic super soldiers, blessed with the unholy might of the dark gods. We're gonna be taking a look at legions like the Word Bearers, who fanatically worship the Chaos Pantheon and want to see the entire universe cleansed of all non-believers. Legions like the World Eaters, who most of us just see as mindless, frothing berserkers, but actually might be the most potentially profoundly enlightened faction in the entirety of 40K. And of course, the ever mysterious Alpha Legion, who actually just got a brand new novel that is filled with an insane amount of insight into how they work, what their beliefs are, and most importantly, what their overall goal is. I'm just gonna tell you right now that whatever you think the Alpha Legion is, you're probably wrong. We're going to be getting into all that and a whole lot more in this video, as there's a lot to cover with the Chaos Legions. Honestly, they're all pretty messed up in their own unique and twisted way, and each and every one of them really could have benefited from some therapy. Therapy that they could have gotten from today's sponsor, BetterHelp. Taking care of our mental health is something that most of us don't take very seriously, even if we all know that we should. It's something that we need to do, but we just keep putting it off. And maybe we don't have time to schedule appointments, or maybe our local area just doesn't have anyone who specializes in our particular needs. Or maybe, as is the case for a lot of us in 2023, trying to find a way to fit it into our budget is a stressful situation that only ends up making things worse. Well, thankfully there's BetterHelp, who makes something as serious as taking care of your mental health more accessible, convenient, and most importantly, affordable. They have a huge network of over 30,000 licensed therapists who are all trained to listen and give helpful, unbiased advice. Because their network is so large, you have a much wider range of expertise available to you than what might be available in your area. You'll be able to schedule therapy sessions at a time that's most convenient for you. And if after a couple of meetings you feel the therapist isn't the right fit for your particular needs, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost, without stressing about insurance or who's in your network or anything like that. Getting started is super easy. All you have to do is click on the link in the description of this video and fill out a questionnaire to help assess your specific needs. And in most cases, within 48 hours, you'll be matched with your therapist. Over 4 million people have used BetterHelp to start living a healthier, happier life. And if you think you might benefit from therapy, then click on the link in the description of this video or go to www.betterhelp.com/Weshammer to get 10% off your first month. Big thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video.
The Word Bearers differ from other Chaos Legions in two major departments. First and foremost, they are by far the most devoted to the Chaos gods. Whereas other legions are monotheistic in their worship or simply don't have any unified system of beliefs one way or the other, the Word Bearers view each of the gods as an intrinsic part of chaos and thus the truth of the universe. And second, as will become a theme throughout this video, pretty much all of the Chaos Legions exist in a shattered state, some seemingly beyond repair. This is not the case with the Word Bearers, as through their unified faith have remained as close as one can possibly get to an intact Space Marine Legion. These guys have done some pretty horrific, inexcusable, genocidal things over the years, but maybe during the days of the Horus Heresy, many of them truly believed that humanity really would be better off under the leadership of the true gods. You gotta remember that these guys had something that all of the other Space Marine Legions didn't, and that was faith. And faith can be a really beautiful thing. It can inspire great acts of compassion, heroism, and can lead people who have sunk to the lowest, darkest places imaginable back out of the darkness and into a brighter tomorrow. But as we all know as well, faith can also compel people with good intentions down an incredibly dark path and lead them to commit some truly horrific and unforgivable acts. With most legions during the Great Crusade, they would show up on a world, force the entire population into compliance, and then take off again, jumping back out into the stars to do it all again. The Word-Bearers were different though. They didn't want to just bind people into subservience, they wanted everyone to prosper under the Emperor's banners. They didn't want to just deliver the Emperor's wrath, but teach the people they encountered of the Emperor's love. They had faith that the Emperor was the one true god of humanity, something that he wasn't exactly the biggest fan of, and this would end up coming back to bite them. Long story short, their beliefs led to them staying behind on their worlds for far too long, falling behind in their conquered world's quota. And the Emperor punished them by burning the symbolic and somewhat literal monument of their faith, the city of Monarchia, to the ground. This shattered the Legion to its core, and they would only end up recovering when they set off on a pilgrimage into the stars to find gods truly worthy of their devotion, which, unfortunately for everyone who happened to live in the Milky Way, ended up being the Chaos Gods. And like I said before, maybe in the beginning, most of them truly felt like they were doing the right thing. Maybe even after all of the dark rituals, the countless sacrifices, and the truly inhumane and brutal acts of genocidal warfare that they inflicted upon the Imperium's population, and maybe even still, a few of them truly believed that they were doing what had to be done. That once all of the fighting was over, they would guide humanity through the new age. However, all you have to really do is take one look at some Word-Bearer artwork to see that 10,000 years later, all of that is gone. It's all right out the window. These are some truly depraved and sadistic bastards. But are the Word-Bearers simply irredeemably evil for the sake of it? Or is there something more to it? What compels the Word-Bearers to do what they do? What is their ultimate objective, and what is their philosophy? This is the opening passage to the Book of Lorgar, and it gives us some good insight into the fundamental pillar the Word-Bearers' belief system is built upon. And that's the truth. All I ever wanted was the truth. Remember those words as you read the ones that follow. I never set out to topple my father's kingdom of lies from a sense of misplaced pride. I never wanted to bleed the species to its marrow, reaving half of the galaxy clean of human life in this bitter crusade. I never desired any of this, though I know the reasons for which it must be done. But all I ever wanted was the truth. And it really is that simple to them. To the Word-Bearers, their beliefs are nothing more than what they perceive as the undeniable truth of the universe. But what exactly is this primordial truth? Well, an aggressively oversimplified version of their beliefs is that the Chaos Gods are not a myth. They aren't simply a made-up story designed to scare people or an allegory for evil. They are terrifyingly real, despite the Emperor's centuries of lies that said otherwise. Because the gods are real, and it's a fundamental and somewhat obvious fact that gods are above mortals in the universal hierarchy, it is the role of humanity to debase itself before its rightful rulers. It is the faithful's unholy duty to purge the galaxy of anything that goes against their god's will. Now, don't get it twisted. They understand just how horrifying a galaxy controlled by chaos truly is, but scary or not, it doesn't matter. It is the natural state of reality. Anything that goes counter to the Pantheon's designs, any mortal that would deny their will, and any moment in time or space that does not bend to the will of the Immaterium is a blasphemous perversion of the true nature of the universe. The Imperium and all the organized societies of the other sentient species stand as a heretical mockery of the gods' unholy plan. Would it be nice if instead of disease, wrath, treachery, and excess, we had the god of books, trees and flowers, of hugs and kisses, and of firm handshakes? Yeah, that sounds great. The average word-bearer would surely contest that that certainly would be better. But that's not how things are. You don't get to pick and choose which god you get, but you have to worship them all the same. You must always serve as an instrument of their unholy will. So the advice that they would give anybody who came asking would be to pick up a book of Lorgar and a warp-tainted bolter, put on a can-do attitude, and go out into the galaxy and purge it of all non-believers. The World Eaters have a solidly deserved reputation as a disjointed legion of butchers that care only for taking skulls and spilling blood in the name of corn. Now, this doesn't mean that there aren't intelligent, insightful, and tactical minds found throughout the Legion's ranks, but most of their plots, schemes, and grand plans do almost always feature slaughter as the ultimate objective, as the Butcher's nails are always pushing them towards killing, and any ability to hold off their influence is always fleeting. That being said, the nails affect everybody differently, and there have been world eaters such as apothecary Aaron Zorzi that chose to join up with Fabius Bile and has demonstrated a remarkably keen intellect and the ability to meditate through the nails biting. Despite a few rare individuals, rage is a pretty prominently binding theme throughout the entirety of the Legion. Blood for the Blood God, skulls for the Skull Throne. It really just about perfectly sums up what they're all about. But from the World Eater's perspective, rage is a good thing. It is pure, unfiltered, and honest. To give oneself over to rage is to truly ascend to a higher mental plane. By giving in to their gory desires, they have experienced a somewhat profound awakening. This is a quote from the audio drama Butcher's Nails, where Angron is slaughtering a whole bunch of Eldar. The narrator gives us some insight into what it's like to truly give oneself over to rage, and honestly, I feel like it sums up the World Eater's views, goals, and philosophies pretty perfectly. This is what it meant to be alive. Humanity was a wrathful species, and anger vindicated all of its sins. Nothing was as honest as rage. Throughout the history of the human race, what release of emotion had ever been more worthy and true than depthless anger? A parent confronting their child's killer, a farmer defending his family against raiders, the warrior avenging the deaths of his brothers. In rage, anything was justified. It was the highest state of sentience. With rage comes vindication, and with vindication comes peace. When it comes to shared philosophy, belief, and experience amongst Khorne's faithful, the World Eaters actually have a pretty interesting way of instilling their traditions, ideas, and even memories into all of their recruits at a genetic level. They utilize these guys known as the Berserker Surgeons, who use a mixture of dark sorcery and forbidden gene crafting techniques to grow new World Eaters in birthing vats, producing Space Marines in a fraction of the time that it would take for the Imperium to create them. Admittedly, this process is pretty wasteful and ends up killing more than it makes, but whereas from the time of recruitment all the way up to when a scout graduates to becoming a fully fledged Space Marine can take years or even decades. For the World Eaters, give or take a month. And because the biological material used to create these monsters is taken from other World Eaters, some part of the process imbues in them all of their memories. This means that when they awaken, they believe themselves to be the veterans of thousands of wars, adopting a mishmash of views from all the donors. In a sense, this allows the World Eaters and their beliefs to live on through their new recruits. The Alpha Legion has a reputation for being the most mysterious and cryptic of all of the Space Marine legions, and that's kind of their whole point. They specialized in subterfuge and manipulation of events behind the scenes, rather than grinding frontline warfare. Needless to say, because they are so intentionally cryptic, there are countless rumors, stories, and good old-fashioned memes about the Legion that have led many people in-universe and outside of it within the larger 40K community to come up with all kinds of crazy theories about what they're actually up to. However, the recent novel Horrormaster dispels a lot of these myths and gives us a lot more insight into how the Alpha Legion functions and what their overall goals are in the modern 40K setting. I'm just going to let you know right now that there's a lot to cover, and I plan on doing an Alpha Legion deep dive pretty soon, so I'm going to go into a lot more detail in that video, but I'll give you a summarized version here. The most important reveal to me in this book was that the Alpha Legion, for the most part, was the only Chaos Legion that did not flee into the Eye of Terror to escape the Loyalist forces during the Scouring. This means that despite a small handful of individuals, the Legion is the only one that truly knows anything of the Long War, as they've been fighting against the Imperium for a true 10,000 years. Not like how other Chaos Space Marine legions that exist within the Eye of Terror suffer the effects of time dilation, where for some of them, the Siege of Terra may really have only been a few decades ago. They pop into the Eye of Terror, come back out for a raid, get their ass kicked, and go back in to lick their wounds, only for a year later they commit to another raid, and surprise, surprise, 5,000 years have passed. This isn't the case for the Alpha Legion. They have had to experience every brutal minute of the last 10,000 years. And because of this, there are no surviving Alpha Legionnaires that were alive during the Horus Heresy. And that's kind of a big deal. At one point in the book, the Alpha Legion is described like a bolt shell that shattered against the walls of Terra, before splintering off into thousands of different warbands, or in this analogy, pieces of shrapnel, that each lodged themselves somewhere deep within the body of the Imperium, dealing a great amount of damage in their own right and never truly being able to be removed. but they were no longer a unified whole. Now, it's true that every legion and every chapter has a history shrouded in mystery, as important records have been purged, sole surviving secret keepers slain in battle, or major historical events having never actually had their events recorded on paper. But with the Alpha Legion, this is taken to a whole new level, as secrecy was kind of their whole bag during the Great Crusade. Their Marines of today look back on their ancestors with a pretty heavy amount of frustration, as they don't really know anything about their Legion's history, what its purpose was, what their goals are, and what they're supposed to be doing. The only thing that they know is that the Imperium is their hated ancient enemy, and it's their sole purpose to see its destruction. There are tales amongst the warbands that apparently their Primarchs once had some grand plan, some super secret ambition that them and all of their sons were all in on. But there are no surviving members of the Alpha Legion from the Horus Heresy era and no records to go on. No one has even seen either of the Primarchs in 10,000 years. Some say Alfarius was killed on Pluto, while others say it was Omegon. Still others say that neither of the Primarchs died, and they still exist somewhere out in space, and one day will return. But these are all just rumors, they really don't have anything to go on here. When it comes to the views of the various warbands, they're kind of all over the place. There's only a single warband that continues the practice of wearing Alfarius' face, contrasted against this being done by the entirety of the Alpha Legion back during the days of the Great Crusade. This is something that is not widely done by the modern Alpha Legion. In fact, at one point in the book, a conclave is called for all of the warbands to get together and discuss what is to be done about the Primaris Marines and the return of Guilliman. A handful of representatives from the warband known as the Faceless step forward and remove their helmets, all bearing Alfarius' face. When the first one goes to speak and says the famous line, "I am Alfarius," the entire room erupts. Some members of the Legion shouting condemnations, others saying, "No, you're not," and others still lost in uproarious laughter. However, Solomon, the main character of the book, steps forward and quiets the crowd down. He says if this warband wishes to continue the practice of looking like their Primarch, they have every right to do so, but let it be known that it gives them no authority over any other warband. And speaking of authority, the Alpha Legion has a pretty nuanced perspective when it comes to their hierarchies. They value expertise above everything else and don't much care where it comes from. Whether the individual be human, space marine, or Xenos, it doesn't really matter. If an individual has expertise in a subject that is useful to the Legion, then they are respected. But there isn't a centralized hierarchy. Now, there are both strengths and weaknesses involved with this. On one hand, they are incredibly fluid and are able to adapt to new situations incredibly quickly. Having to adhere to doctrines, scriptures, and formal recognitions of rank made a warband incredibly rigid, and rigid tools were more prone to breaking when stressed. However, on the other hand, when a serious situation develops, like the Primaris Marines suddenly showing up out of nowhere, none of the warbands can really agree on what to do. It creates a bit of a chaotic situation. The book even dispels the classic Alpha Legion meme of, "It may look like I was defeated, but secretly this was my plan all along. You've activated my trap card, Imperium." There's a battle early on where the Alpha Legion definitely loses and has to retreat, but one of the Legionnaires makes mention of the fact that even though they didn't accomplish what they came here to do, from the Imperium's perspective, they weren't expecting the Alpha Legion to be here, and they're going to be examining this victory for the next century, wasting countless resources and man-hours flipping over every single possible stone, trying to figure out what they missed. What was the Alpha Legion's real objective here? And meanwhile, the Legion has already moved on to their next engagement. This uncertainty on the Imperium's part is made even worse by the Alpha Legion's fractured nature, as from their perspective, they seem to be striking all across the galaxy with alarming cunning and efficiency, when in reality, it's kinda disorganized. Some people might not like the dispelling of a lot of the rumors and myths about the Legion, but I actually personally found this new take on what they're like in the 42nd millennium much more nuanced and grounded. As it stands, the Alpha Legion has maintained one primary objective for 10,000 years, to tear down the Imperium. They just can't all agree on the best way to go about doing that. As I mentioned before, the Alpha Legion of today doesn't really have any centralized hierarchy of leadership, but they do have this concept known as the Horomaster, which used to be a Praetorian rank back in the days of the Horus Heresy. Solomon is trying to unite the Legion by becoming the next Horomaster, and when he gives his pitch at the conclave that was called, he had this to say, and I feel it summarizes the Alpha Legion's views pretty well.
"I have on occasion pulled out a warrior's heart and shown it to them still beating as they died. I intend to do the same to the Imperium. I wish to reach into its chest, rip out its rotten core, and watch its systems go into failure from the shock. Perhaps when everything is done, there may be something worth saving. There may still be some future for humanity, the race that originally birthed us all. But the Imperium, that fetid carcass that spreads its entrails across the stars and bleats glory to its own name, will be dead. And if humanity cannot survive without the Imperium, then it does not deserve to survive at all.
For the Thousand Sons, their goals mostly get boiled down into two major categories. The first is to learn everything there is to know about everything, including all of the super dark and twisted lore of the Immaterium. And two, vengeance for Prospero. This makes sense because from their perspective, they were betrayed by the Emperor and the Imperium when the Space Wolves were sent to destroy their world and everyone on it. They joined Chaos out of necessity, out of survival. And for 10,000 years, that bitterness and hatred they felt has been allowed to fester and grow. When it comes to knowledge, despite popular sentiment online, the Thousand Sons of the Great Crusade era put pretty severe limitations on just how deep they would delve into the mysteries of the Immaterium. Knowledge was sacred. It was the tool that ultimately enlightened humanity and would lead to a better future. But knowledge could also be dangerous. Although the term sorcerer was something that their detractors often levied against them, they rebuked this notion. They were scientists. They were doing science by studying the warp. They followed the Emperor's teachings to the letter and believed in humanity's superiority. The Great Crusade was well underway, and mankind had proven themselves to be the masters of physical reality. The warp was simply the next frontier, one that they were only in the infancy of conquering. After mankind had fully dominated the galaxy, the Thousand Sons believed that the next step was to bring the warp itself into compliance. But they couldn't just dive in too quickly. They knew enough about the warp to know that it was incredibly dangerous, so certain areas of study were off limits. However, after having been betrayed by the Space Wolves and the Imperium at Prospero, all of those restrictions have gone right out the window. All knowledge deserves to be acquired, no matter how dark, unholy, or dangerous. A sentiment that is very much aligned with the Dark Mechanicum's views, although I'm sure them and the Thousand Sons still find many things to disagree on. When it comes to their quest for vengeance against the Space Wolves, however, they would get partial revenge during the Battle of the Fang in M32. They didn't outright destroy Fenris and the Space Wolves, but they did hurt them pretty badly, and they made it so they wouldn't be able to have any successor chapters. Something that has recently changed with the introduction of the Primaris Marines in the Wolf Spears chapter. After this, they would successfully end up retaking the corpse of their homeworld of Prospero, and ever since then, they seem to have been focused on picking up the pieces where they left off during the Great Crusade, building a psychic empire, as they've been sending out calls for psychers all the way across the galaxy to come join them on their homeworld. This is a storyline that started in the Psychic Awakening and is still very much in development. So we don't exactly know where it's going to end up, but we can rest assured that forgiveness is most definitely not part of the Thousand Sons' agenda. As the chosen heralds of Nurgle, it is the Death Guard's ultimate objective to see the Plague Lord's will made manifest, which primarily takes the form of spreading his diseases to every corner of the galaxy, and his corruption throughout the teeming masses of the Imperium. They see entropy and decay as the natural state of the universe, and by accepting the Plague Lord's gifts, one can be made strong enough to endure in a galaxy of rot. This may come as a surprise, but not all of the Death Guard warbands agree on how best to accomplish this grandiose objective. The entirety of the original Death Guard, the men born of Barbarous who fought during the Great Crusade and were at Terra during the siege, feel like they owe their Primarch Mortarion a great debt, as it was he who freed them from the Overlord's tyranny thousands of years ago. Some of them venerate him as the chosen of Nurgle, whereas others see him simply as a man, and a deeply flawed one at that. But man or demigod, the original Death Guard will follow him into hell itself no matter what happens, as their bond to him is the one thing that will never truly decay. Despite this, there are individuals within the Death Guard such as Typhus, and those that have chosen to follow him, traditionally newer turned Plague Marines born thousands of years after Barbarous' destruction, who despise Mortarion. They see him as an ignorant fool, who doesn't take his role as Nurgle's chosen champion seriously enough. The Death Guard represent not only the death of hope, but also the death of warrior culture. Even back in the days of the Great Crusade, they were a win-at-all-cost type of faction, forgoing air and vehicle support to instead grind their enemies under 1,000 ceramite boots in a grinding war of attrition. They had no qualms about using truly horrific weapons of war, and now in the grimdark future, their biological warfare has reached levels of horror that the Space Marines of yesteryear wouldn't even be able to comprehend. There are many members of the Death Guard that truly believe that once Nurgle has taken his rightful place as the ruler of the universe and the entire galaxy is in a perpetual state of rot, that humanity will ascend to new levels of greatness. To become one with the Plague Lord is to cast off needless emotions like hope, fear, and love. It is to give oneself over entirely to despair. Rot and decay is the true nature of the universe, and all the things that humanity does to prevent this is ultimately futile and a foolish attempt at denying reality. Once the galaxy is done raging against the dying of the light and accepts the darkness, only then can it truly rise to greatness. Nurgle is a god of plagues and disease, but also a god of life. Now, all life is equal to Nurgle's devout. The corpse of the soldier killed on the battlefield will become an incubator for trillions of new life forms. To most of the Death Guard, this is a beautiful thing, but Nurgle is also the god of death and despair, and there are some members of the Death Guard that choose to follow these tenets exclusively. For example, there is a Death Guard warband known as the Purge that is characterized by its utter fanatical hatred of life. They forego the biological weapons of the Death Guard, such as weaponized parasites and disease, and replace them exclusively with radiation and chemical-based weaponry, designed to eradicate every living thing they encounter, all the way down to the microbial level. Now, needless to say, this causes a lot of tension between them and other Death Guard warbands. Even though there are a lot of competing philosophies within the Death Guard, one thing remains true throughout all of them. Human agency is ultimately nothing more than a cruel illusion. Throughout all of its warbands, there's a prevailing concept of being rooted to the path you're already on. There is no changing what is already done. There is no point in seeking forgiveness or dwelling on events that have already happened. The only thing you can do is continue to move forward. Nurgle teaches that life is cyclical, that there's no sidestepping or going backwards. The events of the Horus Heresy set the Legion on a path that would see the downfall of the Imperium, one where the plagues of Nurgle spread to every corner of the galaxy. Everything they do, big and small, is ultimately working towards that objective, continuing the cycle of Nurgle. You can never step off of the path, even if it ultimately leads you to sacrificing everything about yourself, everything that you once stood for. Even if the plague planet you now call home bears a remarkable resemblance to old Barbarous, with the key exception that you now live in the jagged obsidian spires that pierce the heavens, and you look down upon the teeming masses, the plague-ridden dregs of society that fight for survival amongst the muck and grime. The most natural thing in the world, the inevitable outcome of walking the cyclical path of Nurgle, is to see yourself become the very tyrant you once fought so hard to rid the galaxy of. The Night Lords do some pretty horrific stuff, but they view themselves as being the only truly free Legion. They're the ultimate nihilists, apathetic to the Imperium's struggles or the ultimate objectives of chaos. They are a legion of madmen, murderers, and sadists that, for lack of better words, do whatever the hell they want. As Space Marines, what they want normally comes down to fighting, as they're individuals bred exclusively for war. War is all they really know, and when you combine this trait with a bunch of criminals taken from the gangs of Nostromo, you get a bunch of insane psychopaths that only really care about themselves and have been set loose upon the galaxy to revel in carnage. Well, it's true that every Chaos Legion is made up of thousands of unique individuals with different philosophies, creeds, and objectives, the Night Lords being no different. If we look at all of those other legions, we can see definitive patterns that bind them all together. The Night Lords are the only faction where this is not the case at all. They have no unifying grand objective, they have no honor, no morals, or creed that binds their actions. They care only for themselves and thus individually pursue objectives that will either make them stronger or give them some form of satisfaction, normally taking the form of hunting their hated enemies, the Loyalist Space Marines, or setting loose on a backwater world to take a much-needed mental health day by slaughtering and skinning its entire population. If the Night Lords ever participate in the larger galactic events, it mostly comes from a deeply rooted sense of spite, or anger and hatred of the Imperium for what was done during the Horus Heresy. But even if you can rally them to your cause, they can never be truly trusted or relied upon. even less so than a faction like the World Eaters. Yeah, the Khorne Berserkers may be a bunch of blood-crazed, frothing barbarians, but somebody like the Despoiler recognizes that if he gives them an appropriate target, he can count on them to act like a jagged, serrated wrecking ball. But the Night Lords? Not a chance. Maybe they'll end up working with you, or maybe they'll take off as soon as they get bored or don't like that the odds aren't stacked in their favor anymore. Maybe they'll attempt to stab you in the back, attacking another one of your fleets in an attempt to steal your most prized ships, while your weapon batteries are trained on the loyalists in front of you. Or hell, maybe the Night Lords will devolve into infighting the moment they engage in the larger conflict, as multiple splinter factions aboard their ships decide that now is the time to initiate a coup. In the Night Lord's omnibus, Abaddon does manage to get them to fight in the 13th Black Crusade, but he realizes that they can't really be relied upon, so the single mission he gives them turns out to be a suicidal charge. He just kinda hopes that they'll make some kind of impact before getting blown up, and this in his mind is the best case scenario, because them being alive and being part of the fleet is a variable that will most likely come back to bite him in the ass. And it absolutely does, but mostly because they figure out what's going on before it's too late. Some Night Lords choose to give themselves over to chaos, proudly displaying the marks of their chosen deity and wielding their demonic gifts in battle. Others see these Night Lords as stupid fools, gamblers doubling down on a dead hand. Some want to become powerful warlords in their own right, whereas others are happy to act as mercenaries, living life from battle to battle. No matter what path any one of them takes, traits like egotism, narcissism, and a propensity for vicious cruelty are all commonplace amongst their ranks. Some respect the ideals of Conrad Kurz, while others think he was a misbegotten fool that led the Legion into damnation and ultimately got what he deserved. Spoilers for the Night Lord trilogy incoming, so skip ahead to the next chapter or timestamp on screen if you don't want to hear it. If there's any hope of unity for the Night Lords, something that rallies them to a common cause, it will come in the form of their prophet. You see, in the Night Lords trilogy, the main character was this ex-apothecary named Talos. He had inherited his Primarch's gift of foresight, but after he was killed, his gene seed was placed in the kidnapped son of two of his former slaves that had managed to escape during the events of the book. This individual would grow into the Night Lord's champion named Decimus, and he was said to have perfected the Primarch's gift. Decimus is prophesied to unite the Legion and bring about the end of the Imperium. However, this trilogy wrapped up over a decade ago, and we haven't heard anything new about him, so the plot is still kinda left unresolved. Aaron Dembski-Bowden has stated in interviews in the past that he plans on continuing Decimus' story, but he doesn't want to force it to meet some kind of quota. So here's hoping in the near future we learn more about this mysterious figure. The Emperor's Children are probably one of the most tragic legions that exist within the Traitor's forces. They were once one of the most noble and honorable of all legions, and now exist as a pack of hedonistic sadists. Individuals that are only interested in pursuing ever increasingly outlandish extremes in the form of torture, murder, drugs, and excess in all forms. They are a shattered legion held together only by their worship of Slaanesh, a god that caused their pursuit of perfection that they prided themselves on to be warped and twisted into an obsession with excess. The vast majority of Space Marines within the Legion display traits of extreme narcissism, egotism, and only really care about pursuing pain and sensory extremes, so there's at least something there that kinda bonds them all together. Although where you or I might find a hot meal on a cold day, an hour or two of video games after a long day of work, or perhaps something a bit more sensual and most importantly consensual to be something that we find pleasurable, that's all baseline normie shit to the Emperor's Children. These are the same Space Marines that, after getting their ass handed to them by Dorn and the Imperial Fists at the Siege of Terra, decided to instead slaughter the civilian population in order to render them down into an endless variety of drugs and stimulants. Their levels of addiction and depravity truly know no bounds. Although there are a few groups within the Emperor's Children, such as the Noise Marines, that we can point to as having something of a defined goal, when it comes to the Legion as a unified whole, they don't really seem like they have anything they're pursuing other than their own selfish needs for sensation. Some prominent members, such as Chief Apothecary Fabius Bile, saw the writing on the wall for the Legion a long time ago and bailed to pursue his own agenda, whereas individuals like the self-appointed Lord Commander Primus Eidolon seek to reunite the Legion and set the stage for Fulgrim's return. Eidolon created what was known as the Phoenix Conclave, a gathering of elite representatives from most of the Emperor's Children warbands. Their ultimate objective is to return the Legion to its former glory, a task that, needless to say, is gonna be easier said than done. They count amongst their ranks such prestigious members as Eidolon himself, Julius Caesarion, Kaspros Telmar, Flavius Alcanex, and Lucius the Eternal, as well as potentially dozens of other members whose identity remained concealed behind obscuring robes when we were first introduced to the Conclave during the events of the novel Clone Lord. As of the time of making this video, Eidolon has sworn the Conclave to Abaddon's pursuits until the time comes that Fulgrim inevitably returns to take his rightful place at the head of the Legion and reunite all of the Emperor's Children warbands. Without a governing figure like the Primarch, however, the likelihood that such a thing will come to pass is remarkably low. Chaos in a lot of aspects is inherently selfish, and the Emperor's Children embody this to an extreme degree. Trying to get them to agree on any course of action, let alone set aside their diabolic pursuits for a greater ambition, is likely to be a headache-inducing nightmare for anyone who would attempt it. However, at a genetic level, all Space Marines have an intrinsic need to belong to something. This makes a lot of sense. It is how they were designed. Brotherhood is one of the most important things to all members of the Astartes, and even the most degenerate members of the Chaos Space Marines share this need for brotherhood, even if it's buried deeper within their core than their loyalist counterparts. Fabius Bile admits that even though the notion of a rebuilt third is both wishful thinking and kind of revolting, there is a chance it could happen. Preying on a Space Marine's need to belong is a tactic that Abaddon has utilized successfully in the past to win many of the Emperor's Children over to the Black Legion. And although Eidolon is no war master, his influence shouldn't be underestimated. Fun little side tangent, this is actually why Fabius Bile ended up trading away his perfect clone of Fulgrim to Trazyn in exchange for a vault of uncorrupted Emperor's Children gene seed, as he saw firsthand the effects his creation had on the Emperor's Children that witnessed the cloned Primarch. They all dropped to their knees immediately, pledging themselves to their reborn gene sire. The notion that the Third could actually reunite was so terrifying to the Chief Apothecary that he traded away his father-child to a crazed Necron kleptomaniac. This is what Eidolon had to say to Fabius when asked about the Conclave's beliefs.
The natural state of the universe is entropy, and we are one with that entropy. We follow it to its ultimate end. With every act of excess, we further break down the bonds between what is and what could be, between the imperfect and the perfect. With every exquisite sensation, we add more heat to the phoenix nest. Birth, death, and rebirth. That is the nature of this universe. We are the sparks of time's cleansing flame, brother. We are the all-consuming fire, and only in that fire can perfection be found. Fulgrim sleeps, but he will stir soon enough, and when he spreads his wings, the galaxy will burn. All that is imperfect will be reduced to ash and forgotten in the blazing world to come. That may well include you and that carnival of monsters you travel with, Fabius, unless your common sense reasserts itself soon.
The Iron Warriors are simultaneously one of the most focused of all of the legions, while having the least nuanced overarching goals. They see themselves as titans of old. They were saved from the Emperor's tyranny by their Primarch Perturabo, and are a legion of unholy engineers and siegecrafters, most of whom are motivated to participate in the Long War solely by a single-minded hatred for the Imperium. Each Iron Warrior, or would-be warsmith, pursues their own agenda, it normally taking the form of amassing as much power and territory as possible. Needless to say, from individual to individual, their objectives very seldomly align, and the warbands war against each other over resources more than they fight against the Imperium. In fact, the Iron Warriors actually suffered from a massive civil war known as the Dispute of Iron that took place in the 600th year of M34 and lasted for about 130 years. It began on their demon world of Medringar, but very quickly spread throughout all of their domains. This event caused the entire Legion to fracture and spawned a lot of the different warbands that we know today, such as the Steel Brethren. The strangest thing about this civil war that still remains unanswered is the fact that as quickly as it began, it suddenly ended, leading a lot of people to believe that the whole war in the first place was by Perturabo's design, and it was done to weed out the weak and unworthy. They all wish to consolidate as much power as possible and are ultimately focused on survival. Many certainly believe their efforts have some larger, grandiose goal, but as of right now, that has yet to really materialize, and most likely won't until Perturabo takes center stage once again. Although we know that Perturabo exists in the background on Medrangar and still plays a prominent role in the Legion's efforts, he's yet to return to the 40K setting proper, so we as the audience are currently still in the dark on a lot of his major motivations and overall plan for his sons. There's a great line about them in the 8th edition Chaos Space Marine Codex, where Abaddon says that he'll fling open the gates of the Eye and lead the hosts of Chaos past Cadia's burning husk. Then, Perturabo and his legion of embittered traitors will march to war once more, their sole intent to wreak such devastation upon the Imperium that no stone stands upon another. And I think that's ultimately fitting for them. They are destruction incarnate and are fueled by hatred for the Imperium and, more specifically, their bitter rivals, the Imperial Fists. They validate their continued existence through rampant destruction, and although all of the different warsmiths and war bands may have differing philosophies and competing agendas, if we're trying to find an overall encompassing mindset for what the Iron Warriors stand for, it's to vindicate their hatred by bleeding the enemy as much as possible. For the most part, I'm going to leave the Black Legion out of this video, as since they're a coalition of Chaos Space Marines from every single Legion and Warband, most of what sets them apart in the philosophical and goals department is based around the War Master's grand plans. And Abaddon is a far more complex and compelling villain than a good portion of the community gives him credit for. And there's actually a great passage by Aaron Dembski-Bowden that I included in my video designed to clear up misconceptions about him that really gives you a good idea of what he's all about at a fundamental level. But I'll summarize the basic concept here. Abaddon very importantly views himself as a man, a member of humanity. He certainly thinks himself more powerful than the menials around him, but he doesn't separate himself from his own species like many transhuman individuals do. Further, he believes that only men can lead other men. No gods, demigods, primarchs, or omniscient corpse emperors. For mankind to survive in the coming millennia, the Imperium needs to be torn down, and its beating heart, which is the God Emperor, must be eradicated. It's actually really interesting following his journey throughout the Horus Heresy, especially near the end during the Siege of Terra books, where he has become completely disillusioned with the War Master. He is a soldier first and foremost, and wants to be sieging the Imperial Palace to overthrow a tyrant alongside his battle brothers, utilizing the arms and traditions of warfare that are fundamental to the Space Marines' identity. Instead, he looks around and sees a bunch of crazed fanatic sorcerers summoning demons left and right, whooping and hollering swarms of mutants barreling forward in suicidal charges, and a War Master, the person he once respected more than anyone else, having gorged himself on demonic power. This once noble and proud leader that he looked up to, having become nothing more than a puppet for the gods of chaos. He was disgusted by him, and it's what made the scene in Black Legion where he kills a clone of Horus so impactful. But Wes, I hear you asking, if mankind good, demons bad, why come does Abaddon allow members of his legion to summon demons and utilize the powers of chaos? Which, honestly, that's a fair question. What he's doing now looks pretty damn similar to what Horus was doing, but there's one major difference. To him, chaos is a means to an end. It is not the end-all be-all goal like the word-bearers think. He will utilize all the tools at his disposal to get what he wants, but he'll never surrender himself to the promise of power or the will of the gods. He knows if he did so, if he truly gave in to their will, they would infuse him with so much power that the next Black Crusade would make Cadia look like child's play. However, if he was to surrender to the journey and forget the destination, then everything he was striving for would be lost.